Belize is a melting pot of cultures, including Maya, Garifuna, Chinese, and Mestizo. Each of these cultural groups brings its own unique language to the table. Though all Belizeans are unified under the national language of English, this is not typically the language spoken at home, posing some unique challenges for both students and teachers. When I began working with Miss Joy at San Pedro High School, I was fascinated by all the different languages spoken around me, and impressed that the students were able to communicate in so many different languages. I started to wonder if this had any positive or negative impact on their schoolwork. I started by talking to the students to get their perspective on the situation. What languages do you speak?
English and Spanish.
English and Spanish?
Yeah.
Do you speak any Creole?
Not that much, but yeah.
Can you understand Creole?
Yeah.
So what do you speak at home?
Spanish.
Spanish? So your parents speak Spanish?
Only my mom and my grandma. My dad, he's in the US right now, so when he comes, it's English.
Do they speak English, just
Yeah.
your mom and your grandma?
Yes, they do.
But they prefer to speak Spanish?
Spanish, yeah, that's the main language for them.
So which do you prefer to speak in?
English.
English?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because, and mostly when I talk Spanish, I can't pronounce the word Spanish correct, so I just look kind of silly when I talk Spanish, so I just prefer to talk English better than my sister.
Do you think it makes it more fair to make everyone speak English at school, or do you think it's kind of unfair to make the people who don't speak English at home?
Well, I guess it's fair to talk English at school. Yeah.
Does it make things harder? Like, do you have a harder time with writing or reading or anything like that?
Not really. At the beginning, yes. When I was, in standard 5, I had a big problem writing in Creole because the teacher wanted me to write in Creole, and then the way how for spelling D, she didn't want me to spell the D-H-E. She only wanted me to spell the. So it's different spelling. Then I had to learn it though. So now I can spell and write in English and Creole at the same time.
So what languages do you speak?
Most of the time I speak English, sometimes Creole or Spanish, but Spanish isn't my favorite language.
Which one do you speak at home?
And proper English.
So that's what your parents speak?
No, they speak Creole, but they taught me how to speak proper English because that's a proper language.
And so you understand English, Spanish, and Creole?
Mostly English and Creole, but not really Spanish.
And how do you feel about having to speak English at school? Do you think it makes it more fair that everyone has to speak the same language? Or do you think it makes it harder for some students?
I think it's fair that everyone can speak the same language, but for some students it is kind of unfair, but most of the time there's mostly people who talk English here in school.
And do you see that some students maybe that don't speak English have any problems in school?
Sometimes they do have problems, yes, but not all the time. After probably a year, they actually get to learn the English properly.
I can speak French, Spanish, English, and Creole.
Which was your first language?
Spanish. And mostly everybody's first language is Spanish.
So is that what you speak at home, or do you speak English at
I
home?
mostly speak Spanish at home, but sometimes English.
How do you feel about having to do all of your school in English?
It's not really a problem for anybody because the country's national language is English. So
Do you think it makes things harder, or do you think it makes it kind of fair that everyone has to do that?
it's fair because out in the world, it's mostly English. It's kind of helping us in a way.
Do you notice any struggles you have in your classes because you don't speak English as a first language? Or do you think you've kind of...
I talk English pretty well because right here there's two kinds of English, proper English and a sloppy English, Creole. So it's not really a problem talking English for me.
How do you feel about the students having to speak English at school?
I understand that it's mandatory, but sometimes when I have class, students will ask me questions in Spanish and I'll explain it to them and then just rephrase it again in English.
Do you think it makes it more fair for every student to have to speak English, or do you think it makes it harder since not all of them speak English as a first language?
Sometimes I think it's harder. That's why I always try to find a way to get to them. If they're Spanish speakers, I'll explain to them in Spanish. Creole, but I can't speak Creole, but I try to break it down for them.
What effect do you see on the students' work that they hand in? Like, do you notice
Their
any
grammar,
their
yeah.
grammar?
Especially because they tend to want to write in Creole or sometimes in Spanish. Like we had an example of the word hereditary. A Spanish speaker wrote hereder. That was her word.
I feel it's good because it's important for them to learn, not only in English because we teach Spanish as well. So it helps them to navigate through the world easier knowing English and Spanish. It's a bit challenging at the beginning, but it's best they go through the problems young and become older in society and cannot speak the language because it's difficult for them to find jobs.
So, do you find that most students don't speak English as a first language?
Most of them don't.
Do you have any that do?
A few. Rebecca does. Eileen, I think she speaks English. The thing is, originally, people who are originally from San Pedro used to speak English. But when other people came from the mainland, they came speaking Creole, and the children naturally picked up Creole and preferred to use Creole instead of using English. So very few of them actually speak English, but some of them read a lot. And if you read a lot of English, then it's easier for you to write and speak English.
Do different languages kind of give their own problems, or do you see most of the kids struggling with the same sorts of things?
No. Different languages give different problems. And if children speak more than one of those languages, it comes right across in their writing and in their speaking. For example, let me see if I can come up with a good example. A child would say, a Spanish-speaking child would say, el libro está en la mesa. Directly translated, it means the book is in the table. And because he uses in, he doesn't understand that in English it's not in, it's on. So like Spanish-speaking kids have lots of problems with prepositions. In the small ones, like in, with, by, on, they have lots of problems with that. Then the Creole-speaking students have problems with the tenses using the past tense, because in Creole the past tense is not formed the same way it's formed in English. Like Creole uses English words, but the grammatical structure is different. They use it's like a little marker that comes in front. It's not added to the end of the verb, it's added at the beginning. For example, in English, you would say, I bought a car. In English, in Creole, you would say, I may buy one car. So it's like the may means it's a past tense marker. So it's different. And very often students, even when you tell them to find the mistakes, they can't. Another example is words like past and P-A-S-T and P-A-S-S-E-D, they just can't get it, because in Creole you say pass, and pass is for us is P-A-S-S and P-A-S-T. You wouldn't say I passed him on the street, you say I passed him. You
Right.
wouldn't say I passed the exam, you'd say I passed the exam. So they have lots of problems with words like pass and past, like loss, L-O-S-S and L-O-S-T. They have problems with loss. Like also in when you use like the past participle, like fried chicken, we don't say fried chicken, we say fried chicken. So even if they see fried chicken, they think that's an error. So we don't say steamed vegetables, you would say steamed vegetables. So they have problems.
Right.
And like there is this exercise we do, error recognition. They find it extremely difficult with pronouns as well sometimes. That gives them a lot of trouble.
Because it's right in one of the languages they speak,
Yes,
but wrong in
was
another
wrong in
one.
another language. And that is why they have been trying to get schools to allow teachers to teach in Creole and show the children the difference. But then that doesn't work. Even though almost everybody speaks Creole, many people speak more than one language at home. So if you teach them only Creole, then you're not making allowances for those who speak Spanish, who speak Maya. You're not making allowances for them. We haven't been doing comprehension, but if we did comprehension, a lot of comprehension, you notice that students are very reluctant to give answers in English. If you say, all right, tell us in English now, they stop. Or give me the answer in English, they stop. So oftentimes, the ones who don't speak English, I would have to tell them, all right, say it in Creole, and then I would have to say it in English, because if you get it, especially the ones who speak only Creole, and you ask them to speak in English, They don't.
They're
And
not
if they
confident.
do, they're not confident. And not only that, they make lots of mistakes. And then those who recognize the mistakes might tease them and laugh, and they don't want that. Especially teenagers, you know how they are
Yeah.
with not wanting to look bad in front of their friends.
So predominantly they spoke English, but you definitely had students who spoke Spanish and then Creole. And then when they did the PSE test, I did notice that none of the students, there was about 30 students in the class, they had to pick between Spanish, Creole, Garifuna, Mayan, which has like 19 different variations, and then other, and all of the students picked one of the 4 languages. None of them picked other, so English was not their first language. But you do have a lot of like past tense usage when it's not the right time for it, and then like subject verb agreement, and it's very similar to what you see with African American vernacular English in the States. So those common errors that are associated usually with like a language variation or dialect. But the teacher I worked with spoke Spanish and Creole, so a lot of times she would jump into Spanish or she would jump into Creole to help explain instructions, and I think maybe that was a preventative measure so that the students wouldn't get to that frustration level. But if she didn't have those tools, then I would imagine there'd be some sort of like frustration and misunderstanding.
I think is that students appear to be ignorant because they make mistakes in English, and it makes them sound ignorant when in fact they're not. It's just
Right.
that English isn't their first language. There's this myth that we're an English-speaking country, and so they assume that since it's an English-speaking country, everybody speaks English, so they have to call it like sink or swim. They're expected to speak English, they're expected to write English, even though it's not their first language. Maybe might not even be the second language. It's like third in some cases. Will it ever change?